Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the Acts of the Apostles. We are in Acts chapter 21. Paul has returned to Jerusalem, bringing with him a relief offering for the church there. We saw in our last session that he was greeted warmly by the church, by James and the elders. And that's where we pick up the reading. We're at verse 19 of chapter 21. Now Paul greeted them, that is the leaders of the church, and he reported in detail all that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. So he gives a detailed report of the 3 missionary journeys, of the great Gentile churches that are now being established, how the gospel is flourishing in Asia Minor, in Greece. Now when they heard this, they praised God and they said to Paul, "Brother, you see, many thousands of Jews have believed. All of them are zealous for the law. But they have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, teaching them not to circumcise their children or to live according to our customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come." Now listen carefully to what the church in Jerusalem tells Paul. It said, most of our church here in Jerusalem, of course, is all Jewish believers. We are accepted in the community as followers of Jesus, but also still good Jewish men and women. In many ways, the church in Jerusalem was seen by those Jews who did not believe in Jesus as simply another denominational variant of Judaism. They didn't see it as another religion. Not yet. But they've heard about Paul's work among the Gentiles. And they've heard that lots of Gentiles are coming to faith, and that concerns the wider Jewish community. They've even heard false reports that Paul is telling Jews in the dispersion, that is, who live in the wider Roman Empire, telling them not to follow the law anymore. That's not true, of course, but that's what they've heard. And so the church in Jerusalem is concerned that with Paul's coming, that might cause some problems. So they say, what shall we do? They have a plan. They have a plan. They said, listen, there are 4 men here with us. They've taken a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites, pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. This sounds like the Nazarite Vow. We're not sure. Then everyone will know there's no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourselves live in obedience to the law. Now, as for Gentile believers, we've already written to them of our decision at the Jerusalem Council. That still stands. So the next day, Paul went with the men, purified himself along with them, went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end. Now it seems that 4 of the men in the Jewish Christian church were taking a Nazarite vow, which is a temporary vow of commitment to the Lord. They said, Paul, why don't you join with them? Pay the expenses involved. That way the word will be known around town, around the city, that though you preach among the Gentiles, as a Jew, you still live according to the Jewish law, the Jewish custom. Paul was willing to do this. He saw no problem with this. Now remember, he would never compromise the faith when you're preaching to the Gentiles about salvation by faith. But on matters such as this, he was willing to compromise if it would help the gospel among Jewish people. And so he agrees to this. It sounds like a good plan, but it doesn't quite work out that way. When the 7 days were nearly over, that is the days of the Nazarite vow, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. These are Jews from around the area of Ephesus, where Paul had spent between 2 and 3 years evangelizing. They know Paul well. They're in Jerusalem visiting. They recognize Paul. They see him at the temple. They start a disturbance. They stir up the crowd. They seize Paul and say, "Fellow Israelites, help us. This is the man who teaches everywhere things against our people and against the law and against this temple. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple. He has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul. They assumed Paul had brought him into the temple. You see, they recognized Paul, these Jews from Ephesus. They think of Paul as an enemy. And so they start this rumor, he has defiled the temple. He has brought Gentiles into the temple. Because they had seen some of the Gentile believers from Ephesus in the city with Paul. Now, Paul had not brought them into the temple. That's against the law. That is not allowed. Gentiles are not allowed in the temple. Paul had not done that, but they assumed he had. And so they spread that rumor. That stirs everyone up. The whole city is aroused. People come running from all directions. They seize Paul. They drag him from the temple. The gates are closed. They try to kill him. Paul's life is in danger. Now, news of this reaches the commander of the Roman troops that the city of Jerusalem is in an uproar. The Romans maintain a garrison in temple just to quell disturbances that may arise. It is located next to the temple. So quickly the garrison gets word of the disturbance. So some officers and soldiers run down to the crowd. They stop beating Paul when they see the Roman soldiers. The commander comes up and arrests Paul and orders him to be bound with 2 chains. Now, this Roman commander does not know what's going on. He just knows there's a disturbance that's centered around Paul. He sees the crowd beating Paul. So he comes in with his troops, disperses the crowd. He assumes Paul is the troublemaker, so he arrests him and takes him back to the barracks. The crowd is following, shouting, "Get rid of this man. Get rid of him. Get rid of him. The earth is not fit for him to live in." It's a bad day for Paul. So Paul finds himself now in the custody of the Roman garrison in Jerusalem, under suspicion of being a troublemaker and starting a riot. The main thing the Roman army does is to maintain the peace. And so they think Paul started this riot, so he is now under arrest. So the plan the Jerusalem church had to give a good reputation to Paul in the city has backfired. A riot has ensued, and now Paul finds himself in the custody of the Romans. In our next session, we're going to see how Paul begins to defend himself, but we'll look at that next time. You have a great day today, and I'll see you next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the Acts of the Apostles.